Hey, friends from around the world and here at Loma Linda, we are so glad that you joined us again for another Q&A live conversation. Today, I'm going to be joined with my really awesome colleague, Chris Stanley from Australia. And now he's found his home here in Redlands with his dear wife and two wonderful children. But before we get into our conversation, just want to do a few things. And so first off, if you are watching and you're somewhere on Facebook or YouTube, would love for you to click the share button. Share this conversation with someone who isn't watching at the moment. Second thing I'd love to have you do is just tell us, hey, where are you watching from? We always love seeing and hearing the incredible places that all of our viewers are from. You're truly part of our family. We love having you part of this conversation. And so from our homes, literally, to yours, welcome to this conversation. Today, we're going to discuss a conversation regarding the cross itself and the powerful sermon that Pastor Chris shared with us. Before we get into that, I want to read you a quote, and this comes from a man by the name of John Stott. A good friend of mine, Dr. Larry Thomas, shared this with me, and I wanted to encourage you, if you've never picked up this book, The Cross of Christ, it's a phenomenal book. I want to read you this quote just before we get into the conversation today. And it goes on, and it says this: "I could never myself believe in God if it were not for the cross. The only God I believe in is the one Nietzsche ridiculed as God on the cross. In the real world of pain, how could one worship a God who was immune to it? I have entered many Buddhist temples in different Asian countries and stood respectfully before the statue of the Buddha with legs crossed, arms folded, eyes closed, the ghost of a smile playing round his mouth, a remote look on his face detached from the agonies of the world. But each time, after a while, I've had to turn away. And in imagination, I have turned instead to that lonely, twisted, tortured figure on the cross, nails through his hands and feet, back lacerated, limbs wrenched, brow bleeding from thorn pricks, mouth dry and intolerably thirsty, plunged and blood, tears, and death. He suffered for us. Our sufferings become more manageable in the light of his. There symbolizes divine suffering. The cross of Christ is God's only self-justification in such a world as ours. The other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak. And not a God has wounds, but thou alone." Powerful words from John Stott. And so today we want to talk about this aspect of Christianity directed towards the cross. And so I'm going to invite my colleague and friend, Chris Stanley, to join me now.
Hello.
Hey, what's up, Chris?
How you doing?
Good to see you, brother.
You too. You too. Happy Sabbath.
You enjoy the color orange in that couch there?
It's very vibrant. It is very vibrant.
Hey, well, so glad you're with us. Let's say hi to some of our viewers before we jump in. We've got Eduardo from Lima, Peru. Wow. Awesome to have you. We've got Stephanie watching from your house. I like that. Greta from Grand Terrace. And we've got, let me see if I can say it, Rajeshwari Singhi from Houston, Texas. And Zach Tigui, God bless you, brothers, from San Bernardino. Love it. Marilyn from Holland, Michigan. Jack Cornwell from Olympia, Washington. Christy, hey, good to see you again. Greetings from Western Maine. Rob Rova from Deerwood. Love it. And Victor, thank you so much for joining us from Grand Terrace. Javier, so glad you're joining us from Lima, Peru as well. Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
The body of Christ. It's all over the world. I love it.
Isn't that cool?
It is cool.
And we brought you all the way from Australia.
Yeah.
I love it. And I came from Yugoslavia. We're all here, a melting pot, really.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
That's right. That's right. Hey, well, Chris, let's jump into the questions that we have here. And if any of our viewers have any questions, we'd love to hear those. Jump in the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and go ahead and type any questions that you have in regards to the sermon from today. So our first question is just kind of a basic one, Chris. What's one of the most important or challenging conversations that you've had personally?
Now, this is quite a revelation about myself, because when I read that question there, my mind should have gone to conversations with my wife as we were about to get engaged, or it should have gone to job interviews, or conversations with family members. The first thing that came to my mind, though, was conversations about negotiating for a price on a vehicle. The most challenging, the most important conversations I've had always comes down to trying to find the right price in the secondhand market. That's an important conversation.
It's so unnerving, isn't it? When you're there with the dealer and you're trying to get the price down, and I hate that.
Yep. Trying to make sure you're getting a good price for the car. You don't want to get ripped off. You want to get a car with good value for your family.
No, I hate that. That's the worst.
So stressful.
So now, Chris, when you think about your, I guess, journey with Christ, when was that first time that you thoughtfully said, man, I'm going to decide for Jesus. I'm going to give my heart to him. When did you actually kind of thoughtfully say, I'm going to become a Christian?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question to reflect on. So I come from quite a line of ministers. My dad is a minister. My grandfather is a minister. My uncle is a minister. My dad's two cousins are ministers. My mum's a minister. My younger brother's studying at the moment. My great-grandfather is a minister as well. So,
oh, my goodness.
It's in the family, which is beautiful, and I like it. So I grew up with this amazing cloud of witnesses, is the biblical language around me. It was really beautiful. And so I learned the truths of the Adventist faith, and it became this language that I spoke for faith and for relating to God, and really beautiful. Of course, having grown up with it, there definitely comes a point where you need to say, I want to do this myself. This is something that I want to be a part of. And I got baptized at the age of 21, and I'd probably say that was the moment where I really said, this is absolutely mine, and I agree with it, and it's a part of who I am, and how I want to practice my faith in the world. And I had the privilege of having my father baptize me, which is quite a moment. So but that was the moment where I definitely said,
that's rich.
I'm into this. I didn't just luckily get born into a family that had this. This is something that I actually agree with as well.
I wonder, what was it that this is fascinating to me, just seeing, I mean, hey, ministry was and is the family business, right? What did they do to shape, I guess, the home in such a way that it drew you in as opposed to pushing you away? Or maybe there were seasons of being pushed away.
Well, I mean, when you grow up with your family in ministry, you see the beauty of the job, and you do see the hard parts of it. But the reality is that I saw the beauty of it more than was in any way shown the difficulties of it. And I guess that's why I do ministry. I love it. Like it's a beautiful thing to do. Like you get to talk about Jesus. Like you get to work at church. And on the whole, those experiences with my family were really good. The churches that we're a part of were brilliant places filled with beautiful people. And so, just knowing the job inside out as I grew up watching it be conducted, I saw it as something truly beautiful. So it's quite the family business. When you get, the Stanley family together and you say, can Pastor Stanley say the blessing? There's like 7 people who can respond to that. Like it's.
Oh, don't they always look to the pastor to pray? That's like, you're paid to do this. You should be praying right now for
That's
us.
Right. You're a professional prayer, so you should be able to get this right.
Yeah. I mean, I think for most people, they look to the pastor as someone who is in a unique relationship with God, and so I understand that desire to have that person pray or bless, so I resonate with that. I became a Christian when I was in college as well. I'm assuming when you're 21 in Australia, you're in college or uni.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, uni. That's what you do.
That's when I kind of walked into faith as well. It was a year into college, and I was 19, and I said, you know what, I'm going to go off and do student missions. And so I did that for a year. I couldn't go anywhere overseas. They didn't want me. So I ended up, no, I was too young for the places that I wanted to go. And so that's why. But I ended up in Washington State. And while I was out there, I was task force youth pastor at a church and school. Beautiful place in the Skagit Valley in Pacific Northwest. And I loved my time at the Burlington Seventh-day Adventist Church. But it was while I was there, right in the very beginning, I was like, man, here I am trying to call people to faith who are young, and I don't know if I've been called to faith legitimately. I was just like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And I start picking up the Bible for the first time for myself, not because my dad was telling me. But I did remember my father reading the Bible regularly in the mornings and looking at me as I was going down the stairs. Philip, have you read your Bible today? And I would, sheepishly, yeah, I did. I looked at it, but I don't know if I actually read anything. But that was one of those moments in my life where that was it. I finally said, I'm going to read this for myself, and reading the pages and the life of Jesus just transformed me. I would say that's when I really became a Christian. Yeah. Because I come from that family line where it's the family business too, it's there. Both my uncles, my grandfather was a conference president in Yugoslavia, my father is a pastor, it's there. Everyone's in ministry, it feels like. So
I know you. I understand you now.
You get it. That's how we understand each other. Yeah. You talked about the cross conversation regarding Jesus, and in your sermon you started with an illustration with a gentleman who is a famed professor from an Ivy League institution. Was it Princeton?
Yeah, he currently sits chair of bioethics at Princeton. Yeah.
Okay, so he's still there, the current bioethics chair.
Yeah.
And he was in a debate with someone who was a theologian in Australia that you and your wife got to see this debate happen. Talk us through why this illustration was so vital for you in terms of just finding certain principles and how to dialogue with people that brings about truly a different kind of response.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a really interesting evening. It was at the Melbourne University. It's the largest university there in Melbourne. It's an old sandstone university, and it was a packed event on a Wednesday night. And I mean, like Peter Singer, he's an excellent individual, and he really has made wonderful arguments in many areas of moral philosophy, and he's a very thoughtful individual. However, he's quite strong, and he certainly does push in a very stinging and a very strident way against faith. And so as such, an individual representing the Melbourne Faculty of Theology came along, and the debate was organised. And Peter's traditional approach is to make large stinging statements and to really shock the audience with his arguments against faith. And the individual who was arguing for faith, and again, I forgot his name. I looked for it this week. I couldn't find it. But he just didn't play the same game that Peter usually comes to play. And he began in such a conciliatory way that when Peter's response came and Peter's attempts to do what he usually does were played out, they felt uncouth. They just landed flat that evening.
Yeah.
And so the individual who was arguing for faith, I mean, the things that he did, which I really respect, is, he said, listen, like, I'm going to treat Peter as a rational individual. I'm going to treat him as somebody who believes that they've come to their conclusions for good reason, because we all believe that what we think is reasonable to think given our circumstances. Like that's just, like, everybody thinks that what they think is the right thing to think. Like, that's everyone. And so if you're discussing someone's views and you differ with them, at least begin with the fact that they believe what they think is a reasonable conclusion for their experiences. So, like, that's what he clearly did. And he said that time and time again. He said, listen, with your premises, I completely understand the way in which your argument leads to this conclusion. But I get that. Like, that's a reasonable place to go with that argument. And so I grant you, given the premises that you begin with your conclusions, that's fair. I agree with them. And for the premises that he did agree with, he said, thank you for making those arguments. But he would say things like, but I'm starting somewhere else. And if I start in this position, it leads me to these conclusions, and they stand in contrast to yours for these reasons. But he treated Peter as somebody who was thoughtful and who was reasonable. And I guess, as I said, essentially in the sermon, like, be the sort of person that you want to be converted by.
Oh, wow.
Like, that's kind of how, like, if you're standing in opposition to somebody's argument, you want them to treat you as reasonable. You want them to treat your conclusions as meaningful. You want them to take your questions as important. You want them to actually listen to what you've learned and hear about your experience. And the individual making those arguments that evening, he did that. He treated Peter with such respect that it was just an excellent example of taking his perspective. But then the other thing that was unique as well is he didn't go there with the intent to fight or to win. Because in a conversation, if there's a winner and a loser, you shouldn't feel great about winning, because you should have empathy with the person who's just lost. Because no one wants to lose. Like, no one's like, hey, I lost there. And no one likes the experience when somebody comes along and says, listen, you've got this idea, and so now I'm going to pry it out. I'm going to displace it. I'm going to, like, move your ideological foundations. I'm going to make space for my own and plonk mine in there and say I'm the victor and plant my flag and say, congratulations, I'm right. There you go. Now you agree with me. Like no one wants that to happen to them. Yeah. And so I guess just this individual, he was conversant, he was kind, he was humble. And it was a shocking change to the debate, so much so that Peter, like, he began with the words, it's like, this is unusually congenial. And he was thrown from that point on, because he's used to just dropping bombs and casting us, but he's used to that game. But it didn't happen that night. And I thought the line that I came away with was, like, convert unto others as you'd have them convert unto you, or be the sort of person that you would want to be converted by.
Wow. Chris, so many rich points in that, man. That is so good. That is so good. I wonder, how would you say this would also even influence our social media usage and conversations?
Yeah. I mean, again, you've got to take the same approaches, because, as I said, like, everybody thinks that what they think is reasonable for their position. Everybody believes that what they believe is the right thing to believe. Like, we all do that. I believe I'm right. Like, I believe, given my experience, I think I've come to the right conclusions. We need to be humble enough to know that other people have come to different conclusions for different reasons. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's come to the right conclusion, but you at least need to begin with the position of saying, if I'd lived their life, I would believe the same thing that they believe right now. I need to treat them as a functioning, rational individual. And I do need to, it's not that we shouldn't have any conclusions, or that we shouldn't say, listen, I disagree, and I think the consequences of those ideas are this, and that thought doesn't quite, reach those ends. Like, we can say those things, but listen, treat others as rational people and as thoughtful people and as good-intentioned people as well. Because I believe I'm good-intentioned. Like, I'm sure I've got good intentions. Like, I'm positive of that. And everybody, again, believes that as well. You believe that you've got good intentions, and you do. But when somebody treats you as if you don't have good intentions, like, it's not productive for a conversation. And then also, don't go there to win. Go there with the idea that the person that you are discussing any truth with might actually have something to teach you. Just be open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Rich, these are rich things. I think when we think about winning in a conversation with someone that's different than us, you really do not only diminish their experiences, you not only diminish their personhood at that moment, but you almost shame them to feeling like, I guess I did lost, And so that really isn't a conversation. That's a battle that you're going into.
What happens? It's human nature not to want to lose. Like, we hate that. Like if me and my wife, if we're having a conversation, and we realize that we're on different ends of the spectrum. Like we're discussing something, and like the distance between us is as vast as the fields of Kansas. We're being nice, we're being respectful, but we realize we're at different ends of the spectrum. Halfway through the conversation, I realize I'm wrong. Completely and utterly indefensibly wrong. There's nothing left in favor of my side. What do? I think to myself, listen, I've been wrong for an hour. I can be wrong for another hour. Like, you know, like I can still win this debate as long as I don't concede that she is correct. Like I can, like, you know, I'm just going to dig in and double down. I'm here. I made this argument and I can keep making this argument. And as long as she doesn't think that I think that she's correct, I can win. Done. Like, it's human nature not to want to lose. So you don't want to make somebody in a conversation about the cross a loser. Like, you don't want to be like, hey, you lost.
Yeah.
You lost. Have Jesus.
Yeah. A friend of mine just recently, who I've kind of started to develop more so of a relationship with, he is a blogger and a videographer, Justin Coe, and he started a very popular blog some years ago called That Christian Blogger. And he realized the conversation he was having was a very internal one amongst Christians. And his greater desire was to really speak to the world around him with people who have divergent views than him, and let that be a big space for not conversion necessarily, but literally just to have a conversation. He realized he doesn't have friends who are not really Christian. He didn't have many, I should say. And as a result of that, just simply having meaningful conversations with people that are different, it changed them and him.
Yeah.
He said that over the last 6 months, a handful of these people who were non-practicing Christians have gotten baptized as a result of conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know why I don't think about that more often. Just like, hey, how can I have a meaningful conversation, a dialogue about spirituality with this person who's completely different than me? Not to win them over, but just to talk. Yeah. I think that's a different way of viewing things. I think as Adventists, we almost have this, I don't know, this winning mindset. It's like, got to draw them in, got to bring them in, got to get them to the fold, you know? And I don't think that necessarily is wrong in the sense that, hey, I want everyone to experience the blessing I'm experiencing. But is something diminished when that's your single-minded purpose in that conversation? I guess that brings me to a question I want to ask you, Chris, and that's, what's the purpose of evangelism and having gospel conversations with people who have not chosen to follow Jesus? What's the point of that?
Yeah. I mean, like, in there's two questions: the purpose of evangelism, and then gospel conversations. And it's interesting, like there is a space, and you're right, there is a space where ideas need to be debated and discussed. You know, when you're doing that in a non-personal format, you know, like if you're doing this in an arena where, you know, two sides need to be debated against each other. Like, there is absolutely place in society for debate and for discussion. There needs to be places where ideas are dismantled and seen if they stand or if they don't, if they fall to reach their conclusions. Like, we need to have that. But in a personal conversation, the dynamics definitely change. And so it is important, as you've said, to simply have conversations with others about the gospel. Because if you believe the gospel is of value, see, the reason why I change my mind is when somebody offers me something better. That's it. Like if I'm having a discussion with somebody and they're in a different position to me, and we come to a conclusion where I've agreed with them, it's because I've traded up. Like, I've got an improvement. I've been offered something. I'm like, oh, that's heaps better. I'll take that. Yeah. If someone would come to me and say, hey, listen, Chris, your bank account's $1,000. Let's have an argument. Let's make it $1 million. Like, you know, I'll be like, you're done. Like, if we actually believe that the gospel has value for individuals and for the world, if we believe that the teachings of Jesus are this radically just inclusive, beautiful moral system and like a revelation of the actual reality of God, if we actually believe that has truth and value for people, I think we should give people who we truly love the opportunity to hear it, because we actually do will benefit for them. Like, it's not an arrogant thing to say, here is something that I truly love and I think truly works and is truly valuable. If you want it, I think it would be beautiful for you. Like, I think that's something you do for the people you love. Yeah. I think I wonder then, what is the apprehension that people have to share? Like, why do they not share then? If they realize, hey, this is eternal life that's at stake, why not say anything then? Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, the areas where we feel reluctant to, I guess, to share are in situations where individuals might have pushed back strongly. You might have had a bad experience. Tried, and they were like, no, that is a difficult area. And also, I guess there are things relating to faith and belief that, well, they're not small things to share, but they're also things that still require some element of faith to believe in as well. Somebody's like, hey, listen, like, let's talk about mathematics. Like, that's something that, it's not that you believe or don't believe in mathematics. Look, gravity is a better example. Gravity. Like, you can be like, hey, listen, do you believe in gravity? And they'll be like, I don't believe in gravity. You'd be like, that's not going to work well for you. Like, that's like, not like I believe in, like, if you don't believe in gravity, life's not going to go well for you. Like, you need to teach people about how gravity works. Okay. Like, it's just it's a thing. The love of God is something that does require belief. And so it has a certain nuanced conversation that is more difficult. It is. Yeah.
Some of our viewers are asking a really good question. I think it's in reference to how do you have these sort of spiritual conversations about faith and family. Gould, when she asked, hey, pastors, would you say that you have good communication with family, such as siblings and parents? And if so, what is the simplest way to have communication as such? Good communication. And I will say, maybe we can use it two ways. Maybe let's talk about how would you have a spiritual conversation with someone who isn't a believer and they're a family member, and then how would you just have good communication in a family?
No, it's an excellent question. I mean, good communication comes from good relationships initially, and good relationships come from good morals. That's one thing. But also, it's a tough dynamic where if you've got a good relationship with a brother or a sister or an aunt or an uncle, and you hold faith and you love them, but you also know that they don't, and they've tried it and they've thought about it and they've walked away, and there's this place in your relationship where you can no longer talk about it because they're not ready for it or they're not interested in it. I recognize that is a painful place to be in. If it's something that you really value, if it's something that you truly love faith, and you see a family member or something walking away from it, that is painful. And it's also painful when you see them walking into ways that are hurting or damaging for themselves. And you find yourself in this position where you want to talk and you want to have a conversation with them, but you're very concerned about the damage or the hurt or the consequences of that. You don't want to drive them further out of the relationship. So in those circumstances, it's important to let your own life be a witness, to be willing to speak about your positions as well, and to recognize the positions which they come from. You won't do any damage by saying, you've been through this experience. I recognize that. It's led you to this position. That's not a bad position to end in. You don't do any damage by recognizing and listening to them. Really do just start there. Find out the truth of their journey, because if they've felt heard, they're more likely to talk. So begin like Philip did in the story. Begin with questions. Begin with learning about the other person, and start with that. Ask questions and let them talk. You don't even have to answer, but just begin with entering into their experiencing and have a kind of an empathetic situation when you go, oh, I get where you're coming from.
Are we maybe just selfish by nature that we struggle to ask other people questions? That's almost where I feel as though a little bit of the disconnect occurs in family systems, where it's like, no, I just want to tell you something. I need to just give you some advice because you obviously don't understand how to do life well, And we're a little bit more loose because they're family, and we're not as almost interested to dive deeper into the lives of those who are right next to us. Do you know everything that they think about an issue? We'll ask them a question as opposed to just speaking to them. I know that it's tough to have relationships with certain family members that have divergent views than you. One of my family members left church, left community. He was elder in a church, and said, you know what, I'm just done with faith. and walked away. And it's been a slow journey of rehabilitating almost just relationship with them. It's been a challenge, and it needs to be both ways though, the desire to have a conversation. So sometimes relationships don't happen because also that other person doesn't want to really invest in you as well, even though you're interested.
Yep.
Those are a few things that come to my mind, but I love what you said, Chris. Do you have a good relationship first and foremost with them, just period? Yeah, I like that, brother. Hey, now someone here is kind of commenting this idea: should someone get rebaptized if they have a conversion again later in life? Is there a need for rebaptism? How does that work?
Well, it's a really good question. So generally, what we say is at least try. So the situation, as we find when Jesus is doing the Lord's Supper with the disciples, is this. There he encounters Peter. I'm trying to remember the scriptures correctly. I believe it's in John, where Jesus is washing the disciples' feet, and as he comes to Peter to wash Peter's feet, Peter says to Jesus, "Lord, don't just wash my feet, wash all of me then." And then Jesus says, "No, listen, Peter, you are already clean, but let me wash your feet to remind you of the fact that you are clean." So generally what I say is this. I say, if you've been baptized, you're baptized. Like, you are a forgiven, clean, loved child of God. Like, it has been done. The other story that comes to mind is the individual who was let down by his friends into the room when Jesus is there teaching and they can't get in. And people look around and Jesus says, what is easier, to forgive his sins or to make him walk? And he says, get up and walk. And they're like, you can't do that. And he's like, watch me, I'll forgive his sins as well. What's interesting about the way in which Jesus heals is that when he heals that individual, he's not like, hey, here's a 12-step plan to walking again. Like, or if you just try really hard, I'll get you on your way. No, when he has made somebody who is whole, well, they are a walker. Like, you walk. After you've been made a walker, you're a walker. Okay, you're done. And the same thing that Jesus gives to that guy is the same teaching as this. Like, when you're forgiven, you're a forgiven individual. Okay, forgiveness is done. Like, you are now in a position of forgiveness with God. Your sins are, so you can't like undo a baptism. So the first thing I'll say is, like, your baptism, absolutely. Your baptism is sufficient. You are clean.
Legitimate.
You are forgiven. You are loved. It is in place there. The example with Peter, it seems to indicate that, listen, when Jesus says to him, listen, you're clean, let me just wash your feet, I'd try that as an option for you as a teaching. I'd say, listen, accept the baptism as being legitimate. That was God. If you want to remind yourself of that ordinance of baptism, we have the ordinance of humility, the washing of the feet, as a reminder of the fact that, like, you have been baptized. And I don't want to take that away from you. So, like, I'd say try that as a reminder of it. But again, I also, like, I don't want to be in the position where I have to say, like, well, listen, no, you can't go through that ordinance again if it missed the meaning for you the first time. Like, I don't want to be in that position. Like, I don't want to say, listen, like, so if you feel that, like, you missed the truth and the beauty of that the first time, I don't want to be like, well, no, you can't try that again. I want you to feel the truth and the beauty of baptism. But let me say this. If you get baptized and you sin again, that's not the reason to get baptized. You get baptized and you're like, oh, I walked away from the church and I came back. No, that's not, like, you don't get baptized for the second time for that. Like, your baptism works the first time.
Wow. Wait, now talk to us a little bit more about that, because a lot of people have this assumption, Chris, that when you really walk away from the church, I mean, you go into drugs and alcohol, you could talk about all kinds of things, and then you come back, that there is a necessity for rebaptism.
I would say I don't see that, because everybody sins after they get baptized. Like, everybody does that.
You sin right now?
only small things. I don't give enough to Adra. But everybody sins after baptism, and so it doesn't matter if it's large or little. I mean, like when you have been forgiven through the process of baptism, is if you backslide, it doesn't make your baptism rendered ineffective. You are still forgiven by God. I mean, it's you can't sin your way out of a baptism. Like it's done. It's sufficient.
Wow.
It's so, you know, like in that case, you know, when people are like, well, I got it really wrong, I'll be like, no, but so Greta here is asking a different question though. She's saying, listen, I was baptized at 16. I don't think I felt quite the conversion when I did that. And so that's where, you know, I'm saying, well, listen, maybe if you missed the experience the first time, I'm not going to say don't go and do it again. I'd say try foot washing as a reminder of that fact and see if it's a helpful, you know, ordinance to remind you of the fact that you are clean and forgiven and God loves you. You know, set up a really special circumstance for that. Find somebody who's willing to do that with you. Or if you do need to feel it for its reality and the truth of it, and like, I'm not going to judge that. But don't ever think that you can sin your way out of a baptism. You can't sin your way out of a baptism. Baptism is more powerful than sin that comes after it. So.
Right. And that question, I think that Greta was asking was also in reference to what Togar Mamora spoke about here just up above. If you're on Facebook, you'll be able to see it. But I think also there is that story in Acts chapter 19 where they come to a group of men who are believing in the same message of Jesus, and then they're like, hey, have you heard about the Holy Spirit? The Holy Spirit?
Yeah, that's true.
We haven't been baptized in the Holy Spirit like you're saying. Well, let me explain who the Holy Spirit is. And it was such a profound revelation that then they got baptized again. I know that is another way that I know I have done rebaptisms for individuals who have.
And I have too,
converted. And man, a lot of people don't maybe know this, but Chris has been in ministry and a lead pastor for almost 10 years, man. A long time. So Chris comes with a rich history of ministry practice. So I know in my life in ministry, I have rebaptized someone who really made a lot of new decisions for Christ, a lot of new revelations. They were going to church on a different day. They come to Adventism. Wow, this is all profound. I would like to get rebaptized. And so in that circumstance, I have said rebaptism may be something that we can look into together. And if you really believe that's something you'd like to do, let's do it.
Yeah. Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah. And that is a good example from Acts. That is.
Yeah. Chris, now talk to me about this. The Ethiopian himself, he was a eunuch, and you beautifully brought out this revelation I had not yet considered. He should have known what he was reading if he was reading that in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He should have figured this out. He was in the Mecca of all places. There were believers there. There were Christians that were around in that space and time. And yet because he was stereotyped as a eunuch and a royal one at that, and someone who was kind of not like everyone else, there wasn't this openness. There was judgment against him, prejudice against him, and he didn't have some of his questions answered that should have been. How do we overcome stereotyping and judgment personally as a church community to have more meaningful conversations with people that would be very open to them if we only tried?
Yeah. I mean, it's very important that we as a church community, we provide places for people to ask questions, because people come with honest questions. They do. And if they're not going to get answered here at the church, I mean, where else are we expecting them to get their questions answered? Like if somebody comes and says, listen, I'm trying to work out the divinity of Jesus, and you're like, well, we don't talk about that here. I mean, are they going to go down to their Chevy dealership and ask that question there? Like, where do we want them to get these questions answered if it's not here with us? Like, I think a church should be very intentional to say, hey, listen, we take your questions seriously, and we provide an open space for you to ask them, because whilst we're an institution that, like, you know, supports belief, we encourage belief. And belief absolutely is important. Like I'm not discounting belief, but we can't judge somebody for not having prior beliefs if they haven't had the chance to ask the questions of them to establish belief in it. Like belief comes as a system of trust and time and conviction. Like, that you've got time to trust God. You've had an experience with God, and you've realized the reality of these things that you've been taught. If somebody comes to church and they don't have trust, time, or experience with God, who will you be like, take that question elsewhere? They're trying to establish these things through asking questions. And yeah, absolutely. Like, we do huge damage if we chase questions off.
Yeah.
If you're standing in front of a wall of truth and we're saying this is true, and yet somebody says, can I ask a question of it? And you say, no, don't touch, don't poke. Like, if you can't ask questions of the truth, it was never true to begin with.
I think to some degree, how people look almost alienates them, because they just stereotype almost the church as well as not being a safe place.
Yeah.
Therefore, they won't even approach it.
Yeah.
Someone who maybe is experimenting with gender, they may be trans or gay or lesbian, and they're just like, I'm not going to go to church because I already know what they're gonna do to me if I go there. Maybe asked to leave, can't, and yet there would be some really powerful conversations, I think, if there was at least the openness to recognize, hey, you don't have to agree with their lifestyle choice, but can you have a conversation with them? Can you provide a loving space for them at least? Can that happen?
Yeah.
And all kinds of things, someone who's had an affair, someone who is homeless, someone who has made some really poor decisions and found themselves in disagreement with some of the church leaders. I mean, there's so many ways in which we stereotype people and just don't then give them the opportunity. But the other group I'm thinking of, which is the group that you and I both love, is youth. I think they have a lot more questions that just don't ever get asked.
Yeah.
They're afraid of what the church would say if they were to be kind of asking these questions. I think of the book by David Kinnaman, You Lost Me, which talked about 6 various ways in which the church kind of feels towards those who are youth and young adults. And so they feel like the church is doubtless, like there's no space for doubt here. They feel like it's overprotective or anti-science, repressive. And this survey was done then with an Adventist community of over, I think, close to 1,000 Adventist young adults, and they scored even higher in that Barna research than most evangelicals. They believe that the Adventist church is even more oppressive, even more anti-science. And I was just like, wow, how unfortunate that our young people would view us in such a starkly negative light with their questions. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or how we can become a little bit warmer of a community overall.
As you've said very well, we simply just need to invite questions without judgment. I've talked to some doctors, and it's interesting. Doctors, they'll say things like, listen, it's sometimes hard to get diagnosis on an individual because they won't tell you the full truth of what's going on. Like they're concerned that the doctor's going to judge them, or the doctor's going to be calling the police in to be like, well, this individual's done this. When they'll be like, listen, if our patients would just tell us the truth, we'd be in a far better position to help them. We need to create the church to be a sort of space where people can come and just tell the truth without fear of being judged or rejected, where people can ask questions that are truly on their heart, and we need to answer them just honestly. We need to take them seriously. We need to say, that's a really genuine question. That's good. Because the other thing that teenagers do is they'll have a question and they'll think they'll be the only person in the entire world to have had this question. And they'll be like, we can read for the past 2,000 years, Christians have asked this question. Like, it's a good question. You just want to have a space where they can come and bring their questions and discover that they're not the only ones with questions, and that these questions are respected, so that we can actually talk about them.
Yeah. I like that. Well, let's go to some of the comments from our viewers. Shemaiah Mills, hey guys, how you doing? Good to see you, Shemaiah. Minkesh, he says this, I like this very much. I believe the first time baptism is a complete ceremony. If we walk away, we only need to renew our commitment in what you actually said, this recommitment of our life and living in the purpose of that baptism. God is always there for us. I agree with that. That's good. I think one thing we forget is that throughout our life, we're going to have new conversions. You know, I'm a pastor and I am reconverted to Christ in certain seasons, you could say, in this profound way. I'm at a conference and I'm just moved, or I think about my life over the last several years and I'm just like, God, wow, what's going on? And I'm seeking after him. I have a new conversion. I think that's a very normal thing to experience in our walk with Christ. But now Togar says something, Togar Mamora here. I want to hear what you think about this, Chris. He says, on the conversation, the Ethiopian came to Jerusalem and asked, even though he did not find his answer. God provided the answer through Philip. The question, should we wait until somebody comes and asks us about Christ to start a religious conversation? Or can we start the conversation, although many will turn away when we start that conversation?
Oh, it's a good question. Yeah, well done. Reading the scriptures well. So, obviously, if you sit down beside somebody on a plane and they're reading Isaiah 53, and you ask them, "Do you understand what they're reading?" Like that's, you know, like that's a good situation. That's an invitation.
Yeah.
Go with it. You know, like
yeah,
absolutely. You know, and just from there, preach Jesus. You know, like as the Ethiopian eunuch did. If you sit down beside somebody and they're reading the story of like Jehud and the left-handed assassin and the very large overweight king, you know, like preach Jesus from there. Like, see what you can do. But like, I think Philip's question in which he approached the Ethiopian eunuch was this: is, do you understand what you're reading? I think that's a question that we can ask people even if we don't find them reading religious texts. He's reading, you know, Nietzsche's criticism of the Christ in his book, The Antichrist. Ask him, do you understand what you're reading? Like I think that's a fair question. You know, the commentator just there, you know, we've been through the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, and it's clearly this spirit-led encounter. Like God's just setting stuff up, and you know, for Philip, it was a home run. Like it was a slow ball. Like it was like, yeah, like here you go, Philip. You shouldn't be able to mess this one up because I'm miles ahead of you. Like God's already got this divine history, and you know, like God's like there's this thing going on that Philip gets to be a part of. But I don't think we should be discouraged, as the individual has said. I think we should take the opportunity to speak about Christ. And again, do it humbly. Do you understand what you're reading? You know, like take it, you know, in the same vein as Philip. And it's true. Like some people might say no. Absolutely. People might be like, we don't want this conversation. You know, I'm good. But I think your bravery and your courage in having that conversation will result in probably more people accepting the gospel sooner. Like I don't.
Yeah.
Like, so say you're impressed to go to talk to somebody, you know, and you feel God's impression. Go talk to that person, and you let that impression slide. It's not that God won't get God's purposes with that person later on. It just might be another 3 years until God finds somebody who's obedient and willing for that.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, do. And you might get lucky. Like they might be reading Isaiah 53. Like it might be this whole run, and they might have this whole divine history behind them that you're about to find out. But you won't know that unless you have a conversation. So, yeah.
So you're encouraging people to take the risk because the benefits outweigh the losses, I guess, of your pride or anything else.
Yeah, that's well put. Yeah.
Hey, Armando asks this. He says, personally, I believe many Christian believers are reluctant to witness or share their Christian beliefs to others because they themselves are not yet totally convinced in their faith and or they lack deeper understanding of the same.
Well,
what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, the comment section is fire today, honestly. I love it. And, I mean, that's an excellent point as well. I mean, as we talked about earlier, you know, if you believe you've got something truly valuable, you want to share it. But if you're not sure if you've got something valuable, you're like, take it, leave it. You know, let's see what happens.
the fact that people might not really be converted, but they're coming to church every week. I mean, what is that a sign of? I guess they've just grown up this habitual thing. Hey, I go to church every weekend. This is what my parents taught me to do. This is how I have community and friendship. But do I really believe? That's a really good one, Armando. I like that.
Yeah. But also, like, we need to understand that some people, like a lot of people are, like, they're growing in their faith as well. Like, this is absolutely a journey. I'd certainly say you don't have to feel like you're sufficient in faith to share it. You don't feel like we never say that you have to have a certain amount of money before you give it away. Like, we like, whatever faith you have, even if it's rudimentary or beginning, I'd encourage you to share it and be willing to, because the spirit in this is always far ahead from where we are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole story of the Ethiopian and the eunuch. Like, Philip says, like, okay, we'll do this, and God's miles ahead. So, like, even if you don't feel your faith is complete, be willing to share it. But I do also agree with Armando there that believing honestly that you have something of value for yourself and the world is an important step to being courageous enough to share it. Like, we do need more people who are completely sold out and completely willing to stand up and say, love your enemies. People who are willing to stake their lives on that idea and are willing to speak that truth to the entire world without a single shred of doubt. Like, we need people who are absolutely sure that this is something that the world needs to hear. And so, both sides. I agree.
Yeah, I like that. Hey, now, Chris, what do you think? Should we, who maybe find ourselves in this Adventist denomination, should we be seeking or pursuing people to convert them from their religions and their other Protestant denominations?
Well, I think so. I would say yes, because I mean, we as Adventists, I mean, we were in essence, like, we have been converted by other religions or Protestant groups as well. Like we have, the historical continuity of Baptists and Lutherans and Anglicans and, like, all of the various theological pieces that they've added together as this kind of growing, body of Protestantism we have inherited and we have been beneficiaries of. And so in the same way that they have shared aspects of their beliefs, we should definitely share aspects of the things that we have found to be true as well as Adventists. I think we know that. Like, the thesis of Ellen White's book, The Great Controversy, is that there's this historical continuity of this great work of Reformation, where are these various groups who are contributing to this reformation of theology that will get us back closer to what the original was, because we drifted off that. And so as Adventists, we need to be grateful that the Baptists taught us about the immersion and believers' baptism. We need to be grateful for the Lutherans who brought to us these ideas about the grace of Christ. But we also do need to be confident enough to say that, listen, we as we dug into the scriptures in our unique geographical time and place when our church began, we discovered some truths that had kind of been misplaced. And I think we can be confident enough to say that these are beautiful, true things for the entire community of faith. The Sabbath, I think that's a beautiful thing that we saw with the Ethiopian eunuch. To get back to Ethiopia in the way in which geographically Ethiopia was kind of protected from, what occurred during the Dark Ages and, the influences of Rome and Constantine that, affected, some of the more true traditions of the Christian church that they maintained in a unique way. And so I think we as the Adventist Church should be willing to speak to the wider Protestant community about some of the things that we think are beautiful, and share them with them and be grateful for what they've shared with us.
Yeah. Wow. Very thoughtfully said, brother. I really like that. I love how you looked back and then kind of pulled us forward. I think that's profound, because you realize, hey, you can have conversations with people when you can say thank you to everyone who's built you up along the way spiritually. And when we think about it as a denomination, we stand on the shoulders of other denominations as well, who have built us up as a group. And now, hey, we do have something to contribute. We'd like to share this with you. We'd at least like to have a conversation with you. The idea of conversion, though, we leave up to Christ, and that's up to him. But hey, I'd like to share what I believe has been just a profoundly impactful and meaningful thing in my life. I love that, Chris. I love that. Very thoughtful, brother. Well, hey, I know that there are a few other comments that some people have, and so I want to just leave just a few thoughts from them. Bill Omar, he says, are we talking about planting the seed and God growing that seed along the person's lifetime, leading them to conversion?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, again, like as important as it is, there are two aspects of belief. They're like the beliefs that we hold govern our lives, and so it's important that you understand that the ideology and the beliefs that you hold will dictate the life that you live. And so it's important to believe things and take responsibility for the things that you believe. But it's also important to understand that God is a part of this process as well, and where we share our beliefs with others, that we're not alone in that process. And so we have these promises of God's Spirit, and we have this evidence of God's Spirit throughout the Scriptures being a part of that process. And so take responsibility for what you believe. That's your responsibility to choose what you believe carefully. But you don't have to take responsibility for what others believe. That is their own individual responsibility. Share. God's Spirit will be with that. And so, yeah, plant a seed, and God will be a part of that process. Have confidence in that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to read one more comment here by Sarah Uribe. She says, after hearing the sermon, I read the story of Jonah, a major lesson I've been learning in Jonah, and reiterated in the story of the Ethiopian is this: who am I to say that someone will not be changed by the gospel? Who am I to judge prematurely that someone will not listen, and therefore it is not worth my courage to share something uncomfortable? Wow. And then she adds one last thing. What a terrible thing to withhold the gospel from someone who could have been changed. Wow. Great words, Sarah. Thank you so much. Chris, thank you, brother, for having this conversation with me today. Really, really loved it, man. You have been gifted with a very thoughtful, eloquent mind, and just all these years of ministry and the family business have turned out well.
Well, thank you. No, it's a pleasure speaking with you and everybody who's commented as well. Conversations about the gospel, we're just always all blessed by them. And we always end up better off having the courage and the joy to speak about the gospel. So thank you. Yeah, a joy. What a nice Sabbath afternoon.
Amen. Thank you. Those of you who are watching around the world, here in Loma Linda, in California, in the States, or anywhere you are, we're just so grateful to have you. Tune in with us next week as well as we dive into more live conversations. Blessings to you, and share this with someone if this has been a meaningful experience for you today.